Hello, my delicious co-creators. Lilu here. I'm in Munich in Germany for part 2 with Dr. Joe Dispenza. Hello.
Hi, Lilu. Happy to be with you again.
Yes, this is great. And this time we're going to talk about healing our body. You're the author of You Are the Placebo. You actually wrote also Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. This is a best-selling book. And you're this chiropractor and you have this chiropractic practice, but you start really discovering more and more and more, presenting more workshops around the world. Most of us got to know you through the film What the Bleep Do We Know? That was a big hit back in 2004 or something. And then you just keep on expanding and getting all those kind of really cool things happening in your own life, but also for a participant in your seminar. So I'm excited to learn more about your own personal story that I read in the book and how you healed. Were you 22 back then? Tell us about that story and how you healed your body, because let's talk about that placebo, that we are the placebo. But tell us about that part in your life where you were racing.
Yeah, I mean, I never actually planned on doing any of this. I think for some of us, in order for us to wake up, we need a wake-up call. And in 1986, I was 24 years old, and I was in a triathlon in Palm Springs, California. And I was negotiating a turn, and there was a police officer waving me on to make the turn, but he had his back to the oncoming traffic. So the moment I made the turn, a truck going very fast ran me over, basically. And I broke 6 vertebrae in my spine and had bone fragments on my spinal cord, and the neural arch, the arch that the spinal cord passes through, was broken like a pretzel. So I had quite a bit of neurological problems and objective findings that warranted a typical surgery called a Harrington rod surgery. And that's where they cut off the back parts of your vertebrae, and they screw in these long stainless steel rods. And in my case, it would be from the base of my neck to the base of my spine. And then they take some bone fragments from your hip and they paste it over the top and they hope for the best. And well, I had 4 opinions from 4 of the leading surgeons in Southern California, and they all said, if you don't have the surgery, you'll never walk again. So, I just couldn't agree to that prognosis, and I was willing to take a chance. And I had this idea that I wasn't going anywhere, I wasn't doing anything, I was laying face down, and I was in a lot of trouble. And I said, there's an intelligence giving me life. Can't see it, can't smell it, can't taste it, can't feel it, but it's doing all these biological functions. It knows a whole lot more than I know. It has a will much greater than my will. It has a mind much greater than my mind. It has a love for life that's much greater than my love for life. So I thought, well, if my will could match its will, if my mind could match its mind, if my love for life could match its love for life, maybe it would answer the call. So I decided to forego the surgery and make contact with this intelligence and give it a very specific plan, a template, a design. And I understood at the time that this consciousness is an awareness, and awareness is paying attention. So it was paying attention to me. So if I started to reconstruct my spine and all of a sudden I started to think about if I was going to be in a wheelchair the rest of my life, or should I sell my home, I would lose the image or the picture of what I wanted. I'd have to start all over again. And I learned something really key back then, because I think when we're in crisis, we tend to focus on what we don't want to have happen instead of what we do want to have happen. And I couldn't get my mind to do what I wanted it to do, because I would start out with really good intentions, and then I'd get frustrated or impatient or angry, and then it would make it worse, and it would take me hours and hours to reconstruct my spine. But I never gave up. I just said I have no other alternative, and every single day I would go inward, and I would say to the observer, take a look at this. This is exactly what I want. And I would dimensionalize my spine, and if I lost my attention, I'd stop and start all over again. And it took me about 6 or 7 weeks to finally go through the whole entire thing without losing my attention. And it was like hitting a tennis ball right in the sweet spot. I just knew that something happened. And from that moment on, what took me 3 hours to do, I was able to do in 45 minutes. And at the same time, I started to notice some very significant changes in my body and in my health. And I started to feel better. My pain levels went away. My symptoms changed. And I knew that I was onto something. So I just made a deal with myself that if I was ever able to walk again, I'd spend the rest of my life studying the mind-body connection and mind over matter. And I was back on my feet in 10 weeks and back to my life in 12 weeks. And since 1986, that's what I've been doing.
And now we're sitting here. We're in 2015, and you just wrote this book. You Are the Placebo. This is a really significant book for you. Then you brought some research explaining how when we have those consistent thoughts and when we have the feeling behind it, actually our whole body changes, our brain, our genes, our DNA, everything, all of that. Nothing is actually fixed. Nothing is determined.
Well, the only thing that's fixed is if you live in an unchanging environment. In other words, if you do everything the same, don't expect your biology to change. I mean, even the research that was done years ago, they used to say that you don't grow any new neurons. Well, that's because they were studying rats in an unchanging environment, and the rats never had any new stimulation, so their brains stayed the same. You put rats in an enriched environment, and they have denser brains, more neurological connections, more neurons, more growth chemicals. So the same thing applies to us. I mean, so then when we teach people then how to begin to enact change, they understand what change is, why change is so hard, and you then begin to have them be defined by an internal state as opposed to an external state, we should measure those changes to see if they're real. And I'm happy to say that we've measured significant changes in people's health, from cancer to diabetes to MS to lupus to thyroid conditions to chronic pain to tumors to rare genetic disorders that medical science had no solution for, not once, not twice, but many times. And so it's beginning to become a trend. And my fascination after my injury was in studying spontaneous remissions. When I wrote my first book, I really wrote the book because Evolve Your Brain was the book, and I wanted to demystify the process of how these people had spontaneous remissions from disease. And I found the commonalities. After I found the commonalities, I thought, well, we should be able to teach this to people, see if it actually works. And so I wrote my second book, Breaking the Habit. We started to see people starting to change. And then when the changes started happening right in the events, right in our seminars, people getting up and had MS for 20 years and were in a wheelchair, standing up right after an exercise or a meditation and walking without any paralysis, I knew that we were signaling genes in real time right in our workshops. And the moment I knew that, I knew it was time to start measuring it. And if we could measure it then, we could begin to then demystify the process and teach it better. So we created these events called Information to Transformation. I believe, and I think I know now, that if you give people information and they learn it, they're going to make new connections in their brain. That's what learning is. If they can repeat it, they're wiring it in their brain and they're creating a model, and the circuitry is a reflection of the model that they're understanding. If you then can give them some instruction to show them how to apply that information, and they can assign meaning to what they're doing, if they can get their behaviors to match their intentions, if they can get their actions equal to their thoughts, if they get their mind and body working together, they should have some type of transformation. If we can measure that transformation and interpret the measurements, that's more information for us to teach transformation the next time. And we can begin to close the gap between knowledge and experience. So the cool thing is, you don't have to be a Buddhist monk. You don't have to be a nun with 40 years of devotion. You don't have to be an academic. You don't have to be a scholar. You don't have to be a Kabbalistic rabbi. You can be a common person. You can be a single mother of 3 children. And you can learn how to do this and begin to change your life.
Yeah. You speak a little bit about hypnosis and placebo and saying that some people, it works on some people and not on others. So this is not really for everybody, but is it?
Well, you're talking about the placebo or how to teach the placebo? Both?
Yeah.
Well, what separates the conscious mind from the subconscious mind is the analytical mind. Some people have a more developed analytical mind, which means that they analyze everything and not a lot of information makes it through to the subconscious. Other people have a very thin veil between their conscious mind and their subconscious mind, and they're more suggestible to things. Now, suggestibility is your ability to accept, believe, and surrender to an idea or a thought or some information without any analysis. The moment you don't analyze it and you accept, believe, and surrender, that thought begins to go right into the autonomic nervous system, and it begins to change people's biology. So, use an example. Someone's given a diagnosis. For the most part, most people, the moment they get a diagnosis, they either feel fear or depression. And now their body emotionally is in that state.
And most of the time when doctor actually announce the situation, that installs also a nocebo.
Exactly. So now the person then can think positively all they want. But if they're feeling fear or they're feeling sadness, that's mind and body in opposition. So then if you can then help a person, again, move into an elevated emotion, and they start to change their emotional state, they'll accept, believe, and surrender to the thoughts equal to their emotional state, and they'll begin to program their autonomic nervous system into that destiny. In other words, getting people beyond their fears, getting them beyond their sadness, beyond their analytical mind. Turns out we know the ways that actually do that in meditation. We know how to sustain that state. We know how to teach people how to shut off their analytical mind and open the door between their conscious mind and their subconscious mind. We've measured it enough times.
So going into the alpha gamma state.
Exactly. So then they have to be able to regulate and control their brainwaves. But we're not just looking for moving into alpha. We want a very coherent, synchronized form of alpha. And the more organized and synchronized it is, the more coherent the message is getting into the autonomic nervous system. So then once the person then can do it over and over again, it begins to become a skill. And we've measured this in our students. Some of them slip into that state in 2 seconds, in 4 seconds, in 5 seconds, in 9 seconds, 13 seconds, 21 seconds. They know how to do it. They've done it enough times that it's become a skill. Now, I think there's nothing wrong with the analytical mind. I love my analytical mind. I use it to learn. I use it to create distinctions in ethics and morality. I'm weighing what I know against what I don't know. It's an analytical mind is a healthy thing. But when it becomes overly analytical, and you're living by the vigilance of the stress hormones,
and 70% of your thoughts I was reading are actually negative, then we're not really creating a blessed future.
And well, actually, those 70% of those thoughts that are driven by the hormones of stress actually drive your brainwaves into not only a beta brainwave state, but what's called a high beta brainwave state. Now, high beta means now you're overly analytical. You're analyzing everything. And you're actually moving your brain further away from the operating system where true change can take place. So high beta is anxiety, high beta is depression, high beta is vigilance, high beta is worry, high beta is insomnia, it's OCD, it's obsessive compulsive. It's all of those things where people get locked in a certain state of where they can't shift gears in their brain. So then they use drugs, they shop, they gamble, they do whatever they can to reduce their emotional state, their internal state, because they're relying on something outside of them. So then we've given people the skills and the tools to begin to then, and it takes a little bit of practice, and it takes a little bit of work, and it takes a little bit of learning. But once you understand how to do it, you know when you're there and when you're not. So to answer the question, when you understand that how programmed people are, you give someone a pill, and that pill is, has a certain name that you can't pronounce. If you can't pronounce it, you're going to give your power away to that pill because you're going to believe it's more powerful than you. If you charge more for pharmaceuticals, it works better. If you name it certain things that rhyme with, like, there's no coincidence that Viagra rhymes with Niagara Falls. That's a lot of flow. It's no coincidence that Rogaine rhymes with grow and gain. It's a way to program the subconscious. So then we're all conditioned into believing that we need something outside of us to change how we feel inside of us. But I'm asking people to change that conditioning into believing that we have all the resources within us to begin to produce measurable changes. Now, some people do it by thought alone. Other people in our work are still treating conventionally or unconventionally and at doing the work at the same time. And the efficacy of their health begins to change even faster because now they're assisting the process to a greater degree. So then people will only in terms of suggestibility, will accept, believe, and surrender to the thoughts equal to their emotional state. And they will never accept, believe, and surrender to the thoughts that are not equal to their emotional state. Because no new information can come into the nervous system that isn't equal to the emotion. Change the person's emotional state to gratitude. Yeah. And all of a sudden now they're accepting different thoughts than they were when they were in fear.
Yeah. I believe like we're deeply addicted to these negative emotions, to this stress. That even it seems like it creates this histamine, or what is that histamine thing? You're not really speaking about it in this book, but could that be a real addiction that we have, and it's hard to overcome that and then really experience a new future?
Well, histamine is only one of the side effects. The real chemicals that are the addictive chemicals are the cortisols and the adrenaline, the epinephrine, norepinephrine. The moment you perceive a threat in your environment, real or imagined, you stimulate a primitive nervous system called the fight or flight nervous system. That fight or flight nervous system is going to begin to mobilize enormous amounts of energy to prepare you for some threat in your external environment. There's a predator out there. There's danger out there. And the moment you release all these chemicals, the brain gets a rush of energy. The body gets a rush of energy. And now your senses are heightened. You're a materialist. You're defining reality with your senses. All of your attention is on your body. It's on the conditions in your environment, and you're thinking about time. And so if 70% of the time people live in this state, they begin to unconsciously use the problems and conditions in their life to reaffirm their addiction to that emotional state. The bad job, the bad relationship, the poor conditions in their life gives them the rush of energy so they can feel alive. So then...
Same thing for disease.
No, this is how disease actually forms, because all organisms in nature can tolerate short-term stress. Deer gets chased by a pack of coyotes. It outruns the coyotes. The stress is over. Stress is when your body's knocked out of homeostasis. The body returns back to balance. Problem with human beings, we got a big cerebral cortex, and we can begin to anticipate the problems in our life. We can think about some future worst-case scenario. We can attend to it to the exclusion of everything else, and our body begins to produce the very chemicals as if we're in the event. We can think of some past bitter memory and bring it up. It comes to life, and we begin to produce the same chemicals in our body as if the event was occurring. So then, it's a scientific fact that the hormones of stress push the genetic buttons that create disease. I just said we can turn on the stress response just by thought alone, which means then your thoughts can make you sick. So the question is, if your thoughts can make you sick, is it possible that your thoughts can make you well? And the answer is yes.
And you're convinced that in our body it can create its own pharmacy. Like, how does that work?
Well, it works very naturally. People don't even realize that they do it all the time. I mean, if 40 to 50% of people who are diagnosed with cancer on their way to their first chemotherapy treatment get nauseous on the drive over to their chemotherapy treatment because the doctor told them they're going to get nauseous. They're getting nauseous before the treatment. That tells us how powerful our mind really is. So then if 50% of those people get nauseous on their drive to their first chemotherapy treatment, why can't 50% of those people get healthy on their drive to work in anticipation of something great happening instead of something terrible happening? So then when you take a placebo for pain, and they've done this study over and over again, and even in some cases, they've told the people, we're giving you the placebo, and it still reduced their pain, because it's not the conscious mind that's doing it, it's the subconscious mind that's been programmed, which means then they're making their own natural morphines. They're making their own natural anti-pain medications. So you
can measure.
Yeah, you can measure that. We can make in tests with asthma. You can take children and you can give them an inhaler to reduce their asthma, and you can mix it with cinnamon. And every time they have an asthmatic reaction, they'll inhale this albuterol or a bronchial dilator, and they'll taste the cinnamon. But what they don't know is that each time they use the inhaler, they're diminishing the amount of the drug until they're just using cinnamon, and they're making their own antihistamines. You can take asthmatic people who have a high tendency for asthma, And you can have two different drugs, one drug to bring on the asthma and one drug to take the asthma away. You can tell the person you're going to give them the drug to take the asthma away, and you give them the drug that creates the asthma, and their asthma goes away because the thought is greater than the chemical. That's how powerful we are. So then, great theories, great dinner conversation, great inquiries, but really when the rubber meets the road, when people then have to actually do it, this is where it gets exciting, because now they have to step into that place where they're going to really begin to make substantial changes. And in the beginning, it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot, just like anything you learn. You learn how to snowboard, you better be really conscious of what you're doing, and you're going to work really hard in the beginning until all of a sudden you figure it out. And once you figure it out, you're going to realize you're working way too hard, and it's going to get really easy. That's exactly what we're doing here. And so if we can measure those changes and show people that it's possible, magic number one leads to magic number two. In the placebo, I talk about a woman who had a condition called polycystic fibrodysplasia. It's a weakening of the very scaffolding of the bone matrix. She was abused as a child. She lived in fear. Of course, it created the very gene that got programmed that began to make a cheaper protein, and her bones broke, and she had all these fractures, and it took her 2.5 years to heal her condition. She doesn't have the condition in her bones. She doesn't have any evidence of fractures. All her blood markers and values are normal. Now, here's the beauty behind that. I wrote about her in that book. We did our event here in Munich in August. A woman came up, stood on the stage, and she said, I read the book. I had polycystic fibrodysplasia. My doctors told me I'd have this condition the rest of my life, that I would continue to break bones, to not do anything physical. I just came from my doctor. I did my meditation every day. I have no evidence of polycystic fibrodysplasia. That's a genetic condition that medical science says is not possible to heal. That's not one person that did it. Now it's two. 2 should lead to 3. 3 should lead to 4. Now we're starting to talk about true human potential. And now we're talking about no longer a theory. We're not talking philosophy. We're not talking, intellectual, analytical information. We're talking about practical information. So when you take that philosophical information and you apply it, you personalize it, you demonstrate it, it means you're going to have to modify your behavior in some way and have some new experience. Now, the experience then enriches the circuits in your brain that you understood philosophically. But then the end product of the experience is the emotion. Now you start to feel healthy, you start to feel whole. The moment you start to feel the emotion, you're teaching your body chemically to understand what your mind is intellectually understood. Now you're beginning to embody that philosophy. But it's not enough to do it once, because if it took you 25 years or 10 years or 5 years to create that disease, by the hormones of stress and the bad choices and the lifestyle, keep knocking on the genetic door till you program the gene, then it may take a little time then to knock on the genetic door to upregulate a new gene and downregulate an old gene, and begin to do it over and over again until you literally begin to make it innate. That you've done it so many times that neurochemically you condition your body to know how to do it as well as your mind. In other words, the mind and body become one. So we go from philosopher to initiate to master. From knowledge, experience to wisdom, from mind to body to soul, from thinking to doing to being. And that's what people around the world are interested in now. 10 years ago, when What the Bleep came out and The Secret came out, it was great philosophy and everybody was excited about it. But then, the common questions that people asked in the panel discussions that I was on for both The Secret and The Bleep was, how do you do it? This is a time in history, as I said, where people want to know how to do it. They want to apply it to their lives. And so in our workshops and events, when we talk, we give the teaching and the understanding, then the person's pushed right into the experience. You understand it? Let's go. Let's see if you can do it.
Yeah, tell us more on a cellular level what actually happens, and in the brain too. After continuously envisioning, seeing, getting into this inner world, feeling it.
Well, there's a lot of things that happen. We've measured genetic changes. We've measured changes in hormones. We see people's cortisol levels and stress hormones go down, and chemicals like DHEA, which are the growth chemicals, enhance. Our students have elevated levels of oxytocin, which is the love chemical. They're signaling that gene. We see more coherent brain states, more organized, more orderly brains, and when your brain is coherent, you're coherent. Our students are able to sustain whole brain states for extended periods of time, and they're able to regulate, and this is not very common, and I was just looking at the research with Roland McCready, the senior research analyst for the Heart Math Institute. He was so impressed with our students because they're able to regulate and hold that state, that heart state, for over an hour, some of them over an hour. And that's just a skill now. So now imagine.
The monks have been training it for a long time.
Yeah, but the cool thing is they're not monks.
Yeah.
These are just common people that learned it in a year.
Yeah.
So what's the coolness behind that? Because I think that mastery is when you can regulate an internal state independent of the conditions in your external environment. Now you are unconditional. And I think that when you can regulate internal states in mind and body, in thoughts and feelings, in consciousness and energy, in light and information, and you are able to do that independent of whatever's going on in your life, you're mastering your life now. So that's my passion, that's my interest. And so from a neurological standpoint, the moment you think differently, you're mapping new connections in your brain. If you keep thinking differently, it's going to feel uncomfortable in the beginning, but nerve cells that fire together wire together. Now you're beginning to create networks of neurons to reflect a new idea. And if you keep revisiting that idea, the hardware circuitry becomes a software program. So the hardware becomes a software program. Now it becomes more automatic. If you're able to then let the thought in your mind become the experience, the end product of the experience is an elevated emotion. Now you turn off these survival centers that have to do with your identity, and all of a sudden that energy starts moving into your heart. And now you begin to produce 1,300 new chemicals that are not only going to stimulate your immune system, but begin to literally upregulate new genes to make new proteins and downregulate old genes that are connected to inflammation or disease.
You turn them on or off?
They're like Christmas tree lights. Genes are like Christmas tree lights. They're turning on and off all the time, unless you're thinking the same thoughts, performing the same behaviors, and living by the same emotions. Now you have the same lights on and the other lights off. Now, all genes make proteins. That's what they do. Your body's a protein-producing machine. So if you keep the same genes turned on, you keep making the same proteins, nothing's going to change in your life. So then when they mapped the human genome, they said, there's 100,000 proteins that make up your body. There's 40,000 proteins that help make those 100,000 proteins. Well, if every gene makes a protein, then we should have 140,000 genes for every protein. When they map the human genome, we have 23,688 genes that are making 140,000 proteins. So it's not genes is the answer. It's the combination. We can have 35,000 variations on one gene. And so then as you begin to change your internal state, and I can tell you research experiment after research experiment. One example, you take a group of stressed out executives. You teach them how to meditate. You teach them how to breathe. You teach them how to do a little yoga. And you have them practice that for 20 minutes a day. You measure their genetic expression at the beginning of the experiment. You measure it at the end. At the end of the experiment, they regulate 1,561 new genes. They upregulate over 800 genes for growth and repair. They downregulate over 700 genes for inflammation and disease, just by doing something as simple as that. Now, why is that important? Because if people don't know that they're doing it and they don't assign meaning behind it, then they don't have the same result. But if you understand the what and the why, the how becomes easier. I mean, a habit is a redundant set of automatic, unconscious thoughts, behaviors, and emotions that's acquired through frequent repetition. A habit is when you've done something so many times, your body knows how to do it better than your brain. 95% of who we are is a subconscious program. That's science right there. So then, when you begin to make a change, truly make a change, you have to come out of your resting state. And you have to make a decision with such firm intention that the amplitude of that decision carries a level of energy that's greater than the hardwired programs in your brain and the emotional conditioning in your body, and your body literally responds to a new mind. In other words, the choice that you make becomes an experience that you never forget. That choice defines you. So if experience enriches the brain and experience creates long-term memory, when the inner experience becomes greater than any past experience, that's when you begin to remove the past out of your body. Now, this is not a difficult process. It's just that most people don't feel like coming out of a resting state because they'd rather live in the familiar emotions. They'd rather feel guilty than step into the unknown. They'd rather judge themselves and judge others instead of letting go of resentment and taking a chance on possibility. So then most people wait for crisis or trauma or disease to make up their mind to change. I'm asking them to do it because they can do it in a state of joy and inspiration instead of pain and suffering. So even if you took 10 minutes out of your day, 15 minutes out of your day, and you became conscious of the thoughts you didn't want to think any longer, and just wrote them down and said, these thoughts will never slip by my awareness today. I become conscious of what I say, how I act. I want to become so aware of who I've been that I would never go back to that old self again. I'm going to look at the emotions that I live by and realize that I'm tormenting my body and enslaving it into the past, and I'm not going to let myself drop to that denominator. Now, this is where greatness is defined. This is when you begin to observe yourself. And if you're observing yourself, it means you're no longer the program. You're the consciousness observing the program, and now you begin to objectify your subjective self. Now, if you said, what thoughts do I want to fire and wire in my brain? What behaviors will I demonstrate today? How would greatness live one day, one lifetime? And you begin to plan your behaviors. The process of mental rehearsal begins to install the circuits in your brain to look like the experience has already occurred. Now your brain is no longer a record of the past. Now it's a map to the future. Now here's the tough one for everybody. The tough one is, I'm not going to get up as the same person that sat down. I'm going to get up as somebody else, which means I'm going to feel empowered. I'm going to feel unlimited. I'm going to feel divine. I'm going to feel the love for life. But I'm not going to wait for something to do it. I'm going to cultivate it by thought alone. When people then get up in a new state of being every day, and they're able to maintain that modified state of mind and body their entire day, independent of the conditions in their life, independent of the old addictions emotionally and habits of their body, and independent of time, get ready because something unusual is going to happen in their lives. That's the law. And so when people begin to just practice this, the synchronicities, the serendipities, the uncommon events that start to show up, empower them and inspire them to want to continue to be creators instead of victims in their lives.
I love that. Our inner world getting stronger than our outer world and living that and cultivating that. I mean, I feel like we're just starting to look at it. We're just starting to look at it. Like you're getting results, tangible results. But this feels like on an emotional and feeling level and intuitive level, this feels like we're just starting to scratch the surface of what's possible. There's quite a world there. Some people say there's multiverse. It's like getting smaller and smaller rather than this galaxies are so big outside.
Oh, I have no doubt.
Wow.
I have no doubt.
Let's explore. Well, thank you so much, Joe. If you haven't read the book, You Are the Placebo, I really encourage you to read it. Thank you very much for taking the time to do these videos. If you haven't seen part 1 on the creation and manifesting, I think this is pretty cool too, what you have to say. Thank you so much. Wishing you a lot of success and looking forward for our next conversation, maybe your next book.
Maybe.
Let's see. Thank you, Joe. Bye-bye. Much love, my delicious co-creators. Speak to you soon. Bye.